Hey guys, you know how there are two main arguments in genetics I like to use when it comes to debating creationists on the idea that all human beings descended from Adam and Eve in the span of 6,000 years? Don't worry, in case you forgot, I'll remind you. One, the genetic diversity of two people is so narrow that extinction is unavoidable, not just from the incest that would have to result, but also from any single disaster that could easily wipe out the remaining humans. For example, in a population where there is enough genetic diversity, a new disease being introduced to the population would only kill some, while others are more resistant due to their genes, and thus the species continues to thrive on. It wouldn't matter how many new diseases you throw, the outcome will still be the same, with varying degrees of survivorship, of course. But if your population is not genetically diverse enough, a disease could easily wipe out the entire species due to no one having the genes to survive. In the course of time, the human population would come across many of these hardships. Whether it's a disease or a natural disaster, it is unavoidable. The chances of survival for the species is so low with two members, because all the offspring would essentially share a tiny gene pool. Number two, which is going to be the topic of today's video, is that there isn't enough genetic information to start with, and there isn't enough time for Adam and Eve to give rise to the huge variety of human beings we see today. And this is under the 6,000 year timeline, which actually isn't what we should be looking for here, but rather 4,000 years, because we need to measure from Noah's Ark, when all humans were wiped out except him and his family. So today, let's talk a bit about how this genetic variety came about while watching a creationist attempt to justify the Bible.
I have adopted African children. They put two questions to me recently about the diversity of man's features. May I ask this to Grady? Adam and Eve are our first parents. There are now so many differences in mankind, individual features, color, hair, faces, etc. Did Adam and Eve have every possible feature in their DNA in order to produce a diversity of features over the millennium?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no.
The fact of the matter is, we've talked about this. Revelation TV and I produced a DVD on the origin of the races, in which I point out there is absolutely no such thing as different human races. We are all descendants of Adam and Eve, and we are all descendants of the three sons of Noah and their three wives, period.
You know, saying there are no individual races, we're all the human race, may sound nice in a political speech, but there are human races. Although there isn't an exact scientific definition, you claiming that every person is the same race is misleading and only serves the purpose of creating an illusion that we're more similar than we are. We have a huge variety of human beings in the world with a huge amount of genetic diversity that we cannot just wave our arms and claim we all descended from a single family 4,000 years ago.
I can say categorically, if the genetic information was not in Adam and Eve, it's not in you.
That's such a simplistic way of thinking, and it's not accurate. When we see if Adam and Eve, quote, has our genes, that doesn't literally mean they must have all of our genes from all the people in the world. That's physically impossible, but more so if they have a set of genes that, given the amount of time, can build up enough mutations and differences to account for the wide diversity we see today. And the answer to that question is no. It's not possible for one family to have enough diversity between them to produce what we have today in the span of 4,000 years.
Now, what happens? We have one pair of human beings who were perfect as human beings, but they had the genetic information for every ethnic feature that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? How is that possible? How can they have the genetic information of all the skin colors at once? It's contradicting. You literally cannot have that. We can pull out really any polygenetic feature or phenotype determined by multiple genes and multiple alleles, and you'd know. Of course, you can always have mutations and such which can introduce new traits, which brings us back to the can we have enough mutations in the span of 4,000 years question.
And what people don't realize is, first of all, Adam and Eve were not lily white, and they were not absolutely black.
Mm-hmm.
They were medium brown, olive-skinned people, just as Jesus was, because the Jews of the Middle East 2,000 years ago were olive-skinned people.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's not how skin color works. You can't just take two people with medium skin color and produce dark-skinned and white-skinned people. You'd have to go through a series of mutations over many, many more generations to achieve that. And achieving diversity is a snowball effect where having more diversity leads to even more diversity. But it works the other way around too. If you don't have any diversity, then it becomes a bottleneck for years to come. If we only had two people or a family of people, for the next hundreds of thousands of years, you'd be able to see the bottleneck in their offspring's genetics, having little to no diversity for thousands and thousands of generations. You'd also be able to look into the genetics and find genes that are uniform, aka suffered from the bottleneck. That's not something we see in the human genome, and that's when we talk about bottlenecking to hundreds or thousands of members. According to Genesis, we'd have to go even more extreme, all the way down to two people. The more I talk, the more outrageous this seems.
They were average. but they had the genetic material inside them that would allow to go lighter skinned, darker skinned, taller, shorter, big ears, big nose, little nose, different colors of hair, different colors of eyes.
It's easy to think that way if you only give examples of simple things like earlobes or eye color, but what about when we talk about much more complex traits? I'm sure you all heard about multiple alleles, how a genotype and phenotype is determined by more than 2 alleles. However, what about thousands? Human HLA typing is an example of that, where we have identified 6,000 different alleles. And when you have that many alleles, it is physically impossible for 2 people or even a family to have all of them to give rise to the variety of HLA types we see in today's population. So in this case, where did the thousands of other alleles come from? To create functional alleles like this, it would take millions and millions of years, and you're trying to tell me it was done in 4,000? Ridiculous.
And all of those things were present in their body in the DNA. So the question that was asked was very good.
Now that he mentioned DNA, there's something else I thought of too. You don't just pass down your DNA to your offspring, you also pass on your epigenetics and epigenetic markers, which plays a big role in determining the phenotype of your offspring. So now we have another layer of diversity we have to think about. Sheesh.
Because Adam and Eve didn't have all the features of all the ethnicities, but they had the genetic information to produce all the ethnicities.
Seems to me like someone needs a crash course on genetics. Also, I have to mention that we're not just talking about humans here, we're also talking about animals in general, because in case you forgot, Noah only took 2 members of each species. Oh, I'm sorry, kind. So not only are human beings able to diverge into a huge genetic variety we have today in a mere 4,000 years, but every single animal too. And if we're talking about kinds instead of species, then we're not just talking about genetic variety or races, we're talking about entirely different species too. Incredible! This evolution speed is something we cannot confirm nor observe.
And those ethnicities come from the Tower of Babel experience, in which one homogeneous population, approximately 140,000 people, approximately 150 years after the flood, were divided by language barriers into 70 inbreeding populations. And the 70 inbreeding populations allowed for ethnic appearances. That what happens is that certain genetic information in a population is eliminated, meaning the tall people outreproduce the short people, and eventually you have nothing but tall people. It eliminates the short people.
Okay, but division doesn't just automatically lead to speciation. There has to be a driving force that differed between the populations, which caused them to be different. For example, you said that one population leads to being taller. Well, in that case, what was the evolutionary pressure that favored people getting bigger? And if that's the case, why didn't it affect other populations? You mentioned that the populations were divided by language barriers, but that doesn't say anything about different environments. So was it sexual selection then? Did one population just have a beauty standard of being taller, and that's how this trait propagated? But that still doesn't explain a lot of things, again, including the genetic diversity of today's human beings, because sexual selection, or survival of the fittest for that matter, doesn't introduce any new genetic information. It's the mutations that do that. We're not asking how Adam and Eve turned into all the races, we're asking specifically about genetic diversity. Although easy to mix up, they are very different.
We all have the same skin color. We all have the same basic structure.
Structure being the same doesn't mean genetically identical or even similar. Look into the DNA code yourself and you'll find many differences that cannot be explained with a mere 6,000 years or 4,000 years. Thank you all for watching. I've actually been sick lately, might be COVID, but tested negative, which is why this video was a little short. I would like to give another shout out to Fireshard Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, and Edward Martin. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.